Good evening. I am an undertaker, sometimes referred to as a funeral director. And it makes not a lot of difference what sector of society you come from. Rich or poor, large or small, sooner or later you will have the need of my services or that of my various colleagues. But that's not what I want to talk about tonight. Tonight's ghost story is a little bit different, because whilst we tend to think of with a ghost a strange experience you can see, feel, hear, sense, but it isn't only just people as ghosts, or even animals. Sometimes things appear in a ghostly form, totally out of context. Let's just look at the case of Jethro Hamilton. Jethro was a music composer, or at least he was trying to be a music composer. He lived just on the outskirts of Wolverhampton, and he didn't have an awful lot of support from his wife, his family, or even her family. They couldn't see how he could possibly make a living just composing music. From time to time, he would play in local orchestras and wasn't too bad a conductor, but he really wanted to move into the world of composing. So when a well-known film company advertised in the film press for someone to create a music score for a new film they were producing, then Jethro put himself forward. What he didn't realize is that the company he was applying to did not have the best of reputations in the music world. They were very hard taskmasters, set almost impossible deadlines, and so the competition for winning the job of being composer wasn't much there. And so Jethro found he was awarded a contract. The film was a Victorian combination of whodunit and a bit of a thriller. And he was told, music we want, this is roughly what the score is going to be, over to you, Mr. Composer. And that's when his problem started, because no matter how hard Jethro tried, he just couldn't get any inspiration whatsoever. His wife kept saying, "You've made a mistake, Jethro, give it up, tell them you can't do it, and go out and earn some money." What he couldn't tell her, that he was into a big financial penalty if he didn't fulfill the contract. And after a while, the film company began pressing him. They wanted to know how he was getting on. Could they have some rough bits of idea so they had some what they could work with? After a while, she said, "Look, you're getting under my feet at home. Why don't you go and find a quiet retreat in the countryside somewhere and see if that does the trick?" She opened an atlas of road maps at random and put her finger down with her eyes shut. It was a little village in Suffolk, just on the edge of some woods. And a few days after that, then Jethro found himself over in this little village. For a couple of days, he wandered around, just starting to get the atmosphere of the place and hoping his composer's block would vanish. But it didn't. If anything, it became worse. No matter how hard he tried, he could not come up with any ideas at all. Then one afternoon, whilst he was out in total despair and desperation, he heard the strains of a piano coming from somewhere. But the piano was playing music that he'd never heard the like of before. It was absolutely out of this world. And much more to the point, he'd never heard it before. Intrigued and somewhat envious that someone could produce music like that, and here he was struggling, coming up with nothing at all. He followed the sound of the music and came to an old, ramshackle, rundown Jacobean manor house, and that's where the strains of the piano were coming from. He made his way across to the comparatively modern French windows, and this is where the music was coming from inside, and the pianist said, "Don't stand out there, come on in." He went in and found the pianist was a fairly elderly lady, dressed in quite an old-fashioned style, wearing dark glasses. And she stopped playing. "Oh, please carry on for a bit." "No," she said, "tell me about yourself." So he began to unload his problems to her. And she said, "I know exactly how you feel. You see, as long as I played religious music for my father, that was all right. But the moment I started composing, he didn't like it. And this score that you're talking about, the one I've been playing now, I composed. I was hoping to get published, but my father snatched it out of my hand. We had a bit of a struggle. I fell down the stairs, damaged my optic nerve, and ever since then, I have been totally blind. Now, she said, if you're looking for a score for your whatever it is you want it for, she said, why don't you use my music? Nobody's ever heard it before. To cut a long story short, Jethro didn't really need much urging. So for the next few days, he wrote down the music as she played it, and he transferred it onto paper and made the notes there. Then he went away and did all the necessary music parts to it, the different speeds, different instruments, presented it to the film company, and it was accepted. And the film was an overnight box office success. The film itself wasn't perhaps of the best, but the music was absolutely superb, and it actually made it. Before Jethro had left, he had informed the pianist, the composer, whose name was Charlotte Bickersley, that when it was all done, he would take over the local town hall, would bring an orchestra there, and he would play the music specially for her, and he would insist that she had the best seat in the house. True to his word, when the time came, he booked the town hall, arranged the orchestra, acquired the ticket for the best seat in the house, and went out to deliver it to Charlotte, because he felt it was no good sending it in the post. She wouldn't know what it was. But he couldn't find the house. Where he thought it was a bit of a housing estate. The houses there went back to the 1930s, and everybody he asked hadn't got a clue what he was talking about. As a last shot, final call, he went into the little newsagents and sub-post office and asked the woman behind the counter, what did she know about the old house that he was desperately trying to find? She shook her head and said, I'm sorry, dear, I've been here for a number of years, but I've never come across a building like that. Oh, just a moment. I'll ask my mother. She's lived here all her life. Mum! So, a few minutes later, mother appeared, and Jethro outlined his problem to her again. Oh, said the woman, no, hasn't been a house like that here since about the 1930s. That's when it was all demolished to make way for the houses that you can see outside now. She said, we used to play in the grounds. Oh, I tell you what, I've got a picture. So she vanished out the back and came back into the shop about 2 or 3 minutes later, carrying a large sketchbook. And she opened the sketchbook, thumbed through the page and said, is this the house? And Jethro couldn't believe it. There, which she had drawn, was undoubtedly the house where he had met Charlotte in. It was dated May 1933. And the woman said, shortly after I drew this, the house was demolished. Oh, Jethro is absolutely doesn't know what to say about that. Do you know what happened to the owner? Oh, she said, do you mean the blind old lady who used to live there? She was the last person to live there. She died in the 1880s. And when we used to play in the gardens, where the house was coming into a ruined state, we used to hear a piano playing. And everybody said she was the one who was playing it, but we'd never had enough courage to go and investigate. Totally bemused, Jethro went back to the town hall, carried out his necessary rehearsals, and later that night conducted the orchestra, the score of the music from the film, the music he had obtained from Charlotte. All the while, during the evening, he kept looking up at the best seat in the house, in the box, but no, there was nobody there. At the end of the performance, the audience gave the orchestra a tremendous ovation. And Jethro couldn't get off the stage, he couldn't get off the stage. They kept wanting the composer, the conductor, because they knew he was the one who had created this wonderful piece of music. And finally, when things had calmed down just a little bit, Jethro stood at the edge of the stage, just in front of the spotlights, and looked up into the best seat in the house. And there, smiling down at him, was Charlotte. Jethro decided he would have to be honest, and although Charlotte had said she never wanted any recognition for the music, he opened his mouth to say, "Look up there, that's the true composer of the music." But as he looked at Charlotte, she shook her head at him, and next time he looked, she had gone. That's the story as I was told. Music is a wonderful experience, but may not always have the result you expect. Whether the story is true or not, I have to leave that to your own imagination. Good evening. Good evening. I am what you would call an undertaker or a funeral director. And no matter what your station in life, be you high or low, large or small, rich or poor, sooner or later, you will need the services of me or my colleagues. That is a fact of life. But not everybody who comes through our hands turns out to be a ghost. Things like that we have no say over. And I wonder how many of you have been into a house or a building, and the moment you've got into it, you've started to feel uncomfortable. The building feels cold and unwelcoming. And that was what happened to Jenny Morrison. Jenny was a very successful artist. She had her own gallery in a little Worcestershire village, and it was on one of the tourist honeypot traps. She would go out during the course of the off-season and do her various bits of painting. Watercolours were her speciality. She also liked to have a bit of contract work because that gave her different pressures that she was able to work to, and she didn't dislike working under pressure. Also, with commission work, she was told what needed painting. Problem was that most of the local scenes that she had already painted, so now she was repainting them but adding one or two period pieces to them. So for instance, you might see a local farm, but instead of having a modern tractor, it might have a horse and hay wain in it. Just little things like that to make all the difference. And this particular morning, she was sat in her gallery waiting for her assistant to arrive. The assistant had phoned in, said she'd be a little bit late, having to take her son to the doctor's. And as she was there, the door opened and a middle-aged, quite well-dressed gentleman came in. "Good morning," he said. "I'm looking for Jenny Morrison. Would that be you by chance?" So Jenny said, "Yes, it would. How can I help you?" "My name," he said, "is Jocelyn Danvers. May not mean anything to you," he said, "but my late father used to own Old Park House, not very far from here." "Oh yes," said Jenny. "I think we've all known of the house, but nobody's been anywhere near it. We were never exactly made welcome." "Oh yes," said Jocelyn with a smile. "That was my father's pet hate. He hated people, visitors, and so he made sure you were not encouraged to go and visit. But he's died. I've now inherited the house. It needs a complete makeover, inside and out." "Oh," Jenny said, "I'd like to help you there, but I'm an artist. I'm not an interior designer." "That's not what I was thinking of," he said. "I'd like you to come, take some photographs and some rough paintings of what it looks like now. So we've got a good before and then later on and after. Could I interest you in that particular job?" "Oh yes," she said, "I'd be very keen." And that moment her assistant came in, and so without any more ado, then Jenny got in her car and followed Jocelyn down to the Old Park House. It was right as he said his father had not wanted visitors. With difficulty, they drove up the drive. There were large signs up saying, "Warning, keep out, trespassers will be prosecuted." And the moment they got into the house, there was a real ramshackle, in a terrible state of repair. And they hadn't been there very long, literally only about 2 or 3 minutes, when Jenny began to shiver. You feel it too, said Jocelyn. Very cold and unwelcoming, isn't it? Yes, she said, it is. Well, let's go outside and have a look at the outside, he said. Took her outside, showed her the outside of the house, the way the garden was overgrown. It was a shocking mess. Going back, he said, to the coldness inside the house. The story goes that when my grandfather came home from the war in 1918, he hadn't been home for 4 years and found that his wife had a 2-year-old son. Obviously, she had not maintained her marital vows whilst he was away fighting. Shortly after that, she disappeared, and nobody knows where she went to. It's sometimes thought that grandfather probably murdered her, but we do not know. My father, who was the little boy they had then, he was looked after by relatives, and they sold the house in the early 1920s. But when my father was old enough and the house came back on the market, he bought it and moved back in again. So that's why I've now inherited it from him. Whilst they were talking, then Jenny was taking numerous photographs in and around the house, and that was the way the next few days went. In due course, contractors started, and when they began to clear some of the garden, they found a statue in an old, well, it was not so much a pond, it was like a small miniature lake. Didn't know this was here, said Jocelyn, and Jenny took various photographs of it. She hadn't long finished the photography when the first few spots of rain fell, and she ended up going back home, couldn't do any more work that day. And when she got back to her studio, she downloaded the photographs that she had taken onto her computer and was absolutely amazed to see that the picture she had taken of this statue on the little ornamental lake was now in a different position. It was way back up against the side of the house. She couldn't get hold of Jocelyn then, but she spoke to him the next day, and she said, I'm coming out to see you, I've got something to show you. Told him what he was. Right, he said, whilst you're gone, or so whilst you're on the way, I will take some photographs myself, which he did. And when he downloaded his photographs, his too showed the statue to be in a completely different place. That's strange, he said. Don't remember that happening. Let's go in and have a look at some of the old photographs I've got. And he took her upstairs into one of the old studies, absolutely full of paper and photographs and the ilk. And he found a photograph showing the statue, which was a fountain, right up close to the house where their photographs were showing it to be. It was of a young woman who had a young child in her hands, in her arms, and it was dated 1918. The woman there, he said, is my grandmother, and that's obviously my father, who she is with. Shortly after she disappeared, my grandfather was taken ill. He had the Spanish flu, and he summoned the police constable to come and see him, the local village man, but unfortunately the village man also had Spanish flu, and he died before he could come. And by the time somebody came out from town, from the police station there, he had died. So we don't know what grandfather wanted to speak to him about. Now I wonder, I just wonder. And he went back upstairs again to another room and sorted through some more documents and came up with a catalogue. It was a catalogue for the sale of the old Park House in 1922. And this showed the statue and the ornamental lake to be where it was now, not where it was in the old photographs. Do you know, he said to Jenny, I've got a bad feeling about this. She said, I think I share it too. So without any more ado, they arranged to have the statue moved and dug up. The workmen came along, took them some time to do it carefully, but when they finally moved the statue, they found underneath it a human skeleton. Police were called, and it looked like it was a murder. They worked out that the skeleton was that of a female, and judging by the hole in her skull, she had been shot. The immediate thoughts were that this was Rebecca Danvers, who was Jocelyn's missing grandmother. He agreed for his DNA to be taken, and it matched that of the skeleton, so there was little or no doubt that that was his grandmother. Shortly after that, and when the police had finished their inquiries, Rebecca Danvers was laid to rest properly in the local churchyard with a proper church service and all the rest. And after the funeral, then Jocelyn had several mourners back to the house, and the moment he and Jenny got into the house before the mourners arrived, he said, "Can you feel it?" She said yes. The house was no longer cold and unwelcome. It now felt warm and inviting. The couple, Jocelyn and Jenny, had by now become mutually attracted to one another. And so nobody was surprised the following year when they were married. They had their wedding photographs taken at the old Park House, now well and truly restored, and they had the photo taken in front of the statue on the ornamental pond where it had originally been, up against the house. So, ghosts, not only of people, but can be of things. And it says the murder will out regardless of how many years it takes. That's the story. Believe it if you will or not. That choice is yours.